Hello and welcome to the development show number 12. We're getting through these really quickly now, having back-to-back lives, which is really nice. We have Dr. Kevin J. Payne with us today, who is inspiration, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. And he does something that I would never ever do. And we'll talk a little bit about that because I kind of don't. I kind of get it, but I don't. So, Kevin, if you want to give yourself a brief introduction to all our listeners.
Well, thank you, Greg. And we'll leave them wondering what that thing is I do that you don't want to do for a little bit here. But there are probably three things that are relevant about me. One, I'm Dr. Payne, so I'm egregiously overeducated, and that's relevant to my story because my doctorate's in sociology and psychology, and I've spent 30 years studying people, especially the question, why do some people succeed or fail under difficult circumstances? And the second thing is that I live with multiple sclerosis, and that is my major difficult circumstance that I can't get away from. And because of living with MS for over 30 years now, diagnosed 15 years ago, 16 years ago now, that has changed my life radically. I spent a decade as a caregiver to a wife with an advanced cancer, and that was an almost crushing experience. Caregiving is not easy, and so those life circumstances really radically shifted the focus of my career and what I'm trying to do. So now in the last more than a decade or so, I've focused on the question, how can we live well even when we have a condition that's never going to go away? Because most of our strategies are about getting distant from the really bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And by definition, my really bad thing is smushed into my body with me and I can't get away from it. And millions of us are like that. In the United States, over half of all Americans now have a chronic health diagnosis. In the UK, you're not too far behind. And in most of the developed world, we're not too far behind. And the third and final thing that people may be interested in about me is that thing that I think you probably don't want to do, and that is that I am an enthusiastic flinger of my body from airplanes. And no, there are no perfectly good airplanes. And as we were mentioning before, we started here. I would normally be flinging my body out of a plane right now, except we're doing this interview. So we're going to have a different kind of fun this time.
Yeah, safe fun that I can join in with.
Skydiving is a dangerous activity that can be done safely because the goal of every skydive is to be able to live to do another skydive.
Yeah. I am fascinated with skydiving. I'm fascinated with the technical aspect. I couldn't voluntarily throw myself out of a plane. I just don't think I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I don't find pleasure, but it's I think the one dilemma for me really is packing a chute.
Well, you have to learn how to do that in order to get licensed. So
yeah,
you practice and practice. But here's the thing you have to understand about a parachute. A parachute wants to open. It is engineered so that it wants to open. And I have seen people jump some really awful pack jobs sometimes. It's called trash packing, and still come out of it all right. So you may have a really hard opening, but you also have to understand too that we jump with two parachutes, and the second parachute is packed by a certified rigger and has to be inspected and repacked every 180 days. So even if you've got kind of a wonky pack job on your main chute, then you've got a backup in there that somebody who is really experienced has done.
Doesn't make me feel any better, but yeah, I understand understand what you're saying. But yeah, no, I think you raised a really good point actually about living with something that will always be there.
Mhm,
And you raised a really good point, because we always talk about distancing ourselves from it.
mhm,
And I know that I talk a lot about having anchors in life and where we anchor ourselves to. And
mhm,
I always talk about it as like a big almost like flexi lead,
mm,
that once we place an anchor somewhere. So I know a lot of people use um life experience and bad experience and things as motivation, and say,
sure.
well, this has happened to me. And I think I think one of the biggest things, and it's certainly something from personal experience, is when people have said, you will never be X, Y, or Z. You will never be that person. You will never progress in your career. And the ultimate reaction is, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. And then the focus becomes on that.
Yeah.
But while you're always anchored to that point, it doesn't matter how far away you get, that will always pull you back to that point. So you can be progressing in a completely different way, and you go, well, hang on a minute, I'm not proving that person wrong. So you change course of where you're naturally going to get back onto that single-minded track, but that anchor's still holding you in place. And this is what I talk about quite a lot, that we can voluntarily place anchors within our lives and say, okay, I've reached this point. Where am I going from this point? But I suppose something with MS and other kind of chronic illnesses is you can't move that anchor so well, because the body will always drag you back, or certainly remind you of that anchor being in place. So I suppose my
Well,
my question is how, kind of how do we deal with that?
a couple of ways. In the first place, certainly for some dispositions, we can find some temporary motivation in trying to demonstrate a critic wrong. Ultimately, that's not a really productive way to frame your life. And the reason why, I mean, there are several reasons. One, you're giving up agency when you do that. You're making someone else's opinion of you more important than your own.
Mhm.
And so you are defining yourself in reaction to someone else. And again, that can be a short-term motivation. And sure, we've got to actually balance the motivators and the reinforcers in our life, and some of them are going to be short-term and some of them are going to be long-term, and we want to stack them up and use them strategically. And some of those are going to be external, some of those are going to be features of a physical environment, some of them are going to be internal. They're going to be uh, our judgments that we make and that are related to our our way of seeing the world. So ultimately, there are only six things that we do that the research says leaves us with a sense that we have a good life, and they're all experiences. And they're experiences that leave us feeling particular ways. They make us feel happy, satisfied, functional, that is, expressing our agency, meaningful, secure, happy, satisfied, functional, engaged, and engaged. So involved in the world. And we know that we get those experiences through interacting with other people, through interacting with nature, through demonstrating and building our growth and our skill and our effectiveness in the world. So all of those are fleeting. And one of the things that we understand if we've lived long enough is that no matter how much you desired getting to a particular goal, once you're there for a little while, the glow fades. And we are looking for a new horizon, a new challenge. And humans are adapted to be this way. If we were not, we would die. And so we do have to keep growing and finding new ways to grow, or we atrophy. There's no such thing as stasis with a living organism. We
Hmm.
either grow or we atrophy. And you get to choose which you are going to be doing.
Yeah, there's there's a quote. It's not an attributed quote that I absolutely love, and it says that there is a law in nature that if something isn't growing, it's dying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I absolutely love that because it is such a simple reminder that to us that we're going forwards or we're going backwards.
Yes. And that is, by the way, one of the reasons why I skydive. And it is, you mentioned earlier about skydivers being adrenaline junkies. And adrenaline junkies don't stay in the sport long
Mm.
because eventually you don't get the same kind of adrenaline rush from jumping out of a plane. I've jumped out of a plane over 600 times
Mhm.
now, and that's not that's not a lot by some standards. I know people who've jumped out of planes 20,000 times and have been doing it for decades. So I think of skydiving as a memento mori in the Stoic sense, as a reminder that we should always seize life in the face of death because we will die.
Mhm.
And that's the story that's in the picture on the cover of my book. If you look at that photo, well, it took us 8 jumps over 6 weeks to get that exact image because it tells the story of not only the book but what I do, and that is so. Yes, it's beautiful clouds and the sun on the horizon and all that stuff, but I'm in street clothes. I'm not wearing a jumpsuit. I'm not wearing a helmet. I look like a normal person who has been put into this extraordinary circumstance. And that's the way we feel too often when we are diagnosed with a chronic health condition. It feels like the bottom has dropped out of our world and our
Mhm.
whole world is in free fall. So there I am. That picture was taken 5,000 feet above the ground. So normally we exit about 14,000 feet. But now I'm at 5,000 feet and I'm doing this. I'm putting my hands up to my forehead and I'm about to sweep them out in a broad gesture. And that's called the wave off. It's a gesture every skydiver recognizes. And what it means is at 5,000 feet, headed to the ground at 120 miles per hour, my life expectancy in that instance is 27 seconds. If I do nothing at that moment, I will die in 27 seconds. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's not a hypothetical. Gravity will win.
Mhm.
And so what I am doing in that instant with 27 seconds left is I'm telling everyone around me, I'm warning them in my airspace that I am about to take action to save myself. So I wave off and I deploy my parachute. And that's what I want people to understand when they engage with your life lived well. Nobody's going to save you. As awful as it is with whatever it is that we're facing, and chronic illnesses can be really nasty, but my life is still my responsibility. And it's not fair, and it's not, there are a lot of issues that come up because of this. It's not right, and yet that is what it is. So in
Mm.
every skydive, there comes that point where, in the face of death, we actively choose life. And I want people to realize that, as you were saying earlier, if we're not dying, then we're living, right? It's
Yeah.
it's one or the other. So you've got to actively choose life, even in the face of something awful that you can't get away from.
Yeah, I love that analogy actually, and I think it does bring us home because very often we wait, and it's your human nature that we wait until there is something that spurs us into action.
Sure.
And we actually had a discussion the other week about coaching, about um, kind of development and stuff, and saying that you don't have to be broken to improve your life,
No,
which
no.
which I think a lot of people think that they do. It is I need to do something about my life now, where with your analogy that you are put in that situation where you have to do something, but
Well,
there's nothing stopping you jumping at 14,000 feet and pulling the chute earlier than that moment.
sure. And by the way, that's a lot of fun. We call that a high pull. And so if you go out and pull right out of a plane at 14,000 feet, you got about 12 minutes under canopy,
Hmm.
11, 12 minutes, which is a beautiful ride down. On the other hand, 5,000 feet is actually kind of high to pull. Usually we pull about 3 or 4,000 feet if you're an experienced skydiver. So maybe 17, 20, 25 seconds left to live, that sort of thing. And, and but it becomes a very normal thing. And I tell you,
Mm.
once you've done this a while, it is an amazing amount of confidence that you can carry into the rest of your life. And for me, going back to skydiving in 2019, it wasn't just about reclaiming a childhood dream. It was about my body had become the thing that I was most terrified of in the world. And with my MS, I'd had, exacerbations where I was left paralyzed on the floor, or where my higher cognition had left me. I've got, maybe 8 or 9 symptoms that are always with me. I'm always in pain. I'm always fatigued. I'm always confused. I'm always dealing with paresthesias, which are phantom feelings that aren't there,
Mhm.
and things like that. Then I've got another 30 symptoms that come and go. So I had been betrayed so many times by my own body that I was determined. Not only was I going back to skydiving to reclaim that childhood dream that I'd started back in the 90s and then had gotten away from and didn't think I could get back to because of my health. But I was doing it because I was putting myself in a position where I was going to regularly use my wonky body to literally save myself. And in 2020, I decided, after I'd come back and got my first couple of licenses and logged about 140 jumps, I said, I'm going to become a legit skydiver, which means getting past 500 jumps. That's kind of when the training wheels come off in
Mhm.
skydiving. You're eligible for all 4 levels of licensing. You are eligible for professional ratings in the field. I got my coach rating as I was going along. And what that means is to do that in 2020, I was going to have to jump better than one jump a day on average for the entire year. And so that's what I did. I logged 370 jumps in 2020. And that was repeatedly tripping my acute stress response, having that experience, saving myself, standing up a landing, even though I can't feel my legs below my knees, and doing it again the next day.
Wow. That's a lot. And there's me won't do one.
Yeah, but I tell people, if you think you want to skydive or you think you do not, you are correct.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Because
Yeah.
there's no good reason to do this.
I mean, there are some places, certainly in the UK. I think there's one up close to Manchester that are indoor skydiving with the
Mhm.
the big fans and things, which is something that I do actually want to go and do. I think that kind of that feeling of, I don't know, how would you describe it, weightlessness or
Yeah, I mean, you are technically
relaxation, or
weightless.
yeah,
You are weightless. It doesn't
that
feel like you're falling.
yeah.
It feels like you are floating or flying.
We've had a question posed, which I think will lead us kind of nicely onto um, a little bit of education. I think that should I consider caring for where I'm going?
That's a rather broad question.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I've
in
been looking
terms
at
of
it
goals,
for a few minutes, going, because
yeah.
I always try and look at the kind of the deeper aspect of things. So, the obvious answer is, should we, and again, it's something I've learned actually, is to say, well, the obvious answer is yes, we should care for where we're going.
Well,
And then my
let me
brain will flip it and say, well, if we didn't care, what would the consequences be?
let me give you a couple of for instances, and I might get a little deep and philosophical here,
No,
but
please do.
uh,
Please do.
from 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 a psychological perspective, okay, we are always moving. If we're moving physically, we're moving mentally, we're moving emotionally. That's how we uh, that's how we navigate through the world, right? And fundamentally, humans are adapted to move toward those objects that they value in a positive way. So they like it, they love it, they need it, they whatever it is, it's familiar, those things, and away from things that we value negatively. Okay, if we frame our entire life about getting away from bad things, well, away is every other direction from where you are right now.
Hmm.
And so that doesn't give you much planning or say in where you end up. If all you're concerned about is getting away from the bad thing. On the other hand, if we actively choose goals and we move toward them, then we're expressing some of our own control or influence on our own lives. So, do we always want to be goal directed? No, because sometimes we want to just be wandering through the world and open to those serendipitous, lovely, wonderful surprises that can happen. But do we always want to be motivating ourselves primarily by trying to get away from the bad things? No, because that's that's a rather haphazard way of trying to organize your life and move yourself through your life. So, Is that sometimes necessarily part of what you're doing? Sure. Should it be the primary way you're doing it? Probably not. You probably want to choose some goals, but what I also want to emphasize too is you may have these big superordinate goals in your life, these things that you want to do, but you can't live in that bird's eye view mode. So what we have to do is every once in a while poke our heads up and look around and see if we're moving toward the goals that we desire. And then we kind of need to forget them and move in small steps in the right direction. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because small steps are things that those are things that we can control and influence. Those are things that we can perceive. If we're always in that bird's eye view, then we lose the detail of our lives, and
Mhm.
it's really difficult to operate in that frame all the time. So yeah, we should regularly, poke our heads up and look around and say, yeah, that's a goal, and this is the general direction of that goal. So I'm going to, if my goal, say, is to become more fit, then sure, I may have some benchmarks that I want to hit. But then what I want to do day in and day out is I want to say, okay, I'm going to break this down into tiny little steps, and I'm going to break it down into I want to be a little better on average every day. Not consistently every day, because that rapidly gets us to a place, because we're going to have bad days.
Mhm.
So on average, you want to be a little better. And then that will get you towards your goal. But if your goal is, yeah, I want to put on 20 pounds of muscle and strip myself down to 6% body fat, well, you're just going to be beating yourself up all the
Mhm.
time for not getting there. And you're going to obsess over tiny little superficial indicators that you shouldn't matter. What you need to focus on, if that's your ultimate goal, you need to focus on how can I demonstrate to myself each day that I'm behaving in ways that are a little more fit.
Mhm.
And then let the process take care of itself. Because once you get to that goal, you're going to realize you got another goal somewhere else. And that's not going to suddenly make your life wonderful and problem free.
Yeah, I talk a bit about, so the question is, should I consider caring for where I'm going? For me, it's all in the prep. It's all in the preparation. If we look back to, your kind of analogies of skydiving, that you know I'm not going to say there's no enjoyment in the preparation, because there is. There's that's where the excitement. So kind of bringing something that maybe I can talk about a bit better is something that I've done. COVID kind of put a bit of a stop to it, but I love mountings. I love being at the top. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a few years ago, there's something in the UK called the Three Peaks Challenge,
Mm-hmm.
which is, for people who don't know, which is the highest mountain in Scotland, England, and Wales, all within 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 11 hours driving time in that 24 hours as well. But it is all in the prep. It's all in the preparation, preparing for the different types of weather. I mean, I remember walking up Ben Nevis. This is absolutely hilarious. Walking up Ben Nevis, and we were actually stood in the car park. This is where our preparation failed us. We were stood in the car park about 6 p.m. and we were going to walk up and down and then drive overnight to Scafell Pike. And we stood in the car park and we were like, right, let's start. Where do we go? And we had to actually go and ask someone where Ben Nevis was. And it might sound stupid being such a high mountain, but they were basically saying, you see that peak up there? And we were going, oh yeah, is that Ben Nevis? And they're going, no, no. If you can see the peak, you're quite close. It's the mountain behind that you can't see. But it was we started walking up. It was a lovely summer's day, t-shirts, shorts, and by the time we got to the top, we'd put on our weatherproof trousers and coats and hats and gloves. And it is all in the preparation. But if we hadn't have done that preparation to start with,
Mhm.
the walk up the mountain, the walk back down the mountain would not have been enjoyable. We would have worried the whole time rather than go, it's getting a bit cold, I'm going to put my over trousers on. It's getting a little bit colder now, I'm just going to put my coat on. I'm going to get my gloves out, my hat out. And soon as that was on, we were nice and warm. You found that enjoyment. And yeah, when you're kind of that high, and I would suggest to anyone that doesn't want to jump out of a plane to go and climb a mountain, because the stillness, the quietness, even the lack of something that people don't realize, the lack of bird song as well. And
Mhm.
it's just the quietness is just immense. But without that preparation, we wouldn't have enjoyed it.
Yeah, certainly preparation is key, and the only caveat that I would add to that is that once you have prepared, then don't let yourself be trapped by your preparations,
Hmm.
because the chances are there's going to be something come along that you did not anticipate. And
Yeah.
and your preparation, believe it or not, even in preparing for the things that don't happen, that's going to be helpful. But then once you are in this position of life presenting you a round peg, don't try to jam it into your square hole.
Mm.
You're going to have to adapt on the fly.
Yeah.
And
And yeah, and I was going to say this is kind of what I'm coming to. So, the question is, consider caring for where you're going. I would say yes, care, but don't allow, once you've done the preparation, don't allow to be so single-minded to care that much about where you're going that it stops you taking different routes, or it stops you taking different opportunities, or you kind of get defeated because it isn't what you prepared for. And I guess, see, the question is, should I consider caring for where I'm going? You see, now to me that's quite a deep question, because the answers is yes and no.
well, we don't live in our goals. We live in the journey. We live in the process. And we know that once we get to the goal, even though right now we think that that's going to solve all of our problems, we know that it's not. And that yes, you may have achieved this one thing, but there's something else on the other side, and that's going to keep moving you forward. Um, I for me, coming back to skydiving, for example, the first license in skydiving is called your A license, and it normally takes 25 jumps to get your A license, and there are over 100 skills that you have to check off on your ref card to get there. And when I came back in 2019, so I had originally started training to become a skydiver in 1996 as a young man, and a lot of life got in the way and everything, and then my health, and so in 2019 when I came back, I'd been through the training before, and I'd logged 13 jumps before then, so I didn't have a lot of experience, but I had some. I kind of knew what I was going to be in for when I
Hmm.
came back. Well, it took me 47 jumps to get my A license. And the reason was I can't feel my legs below my knees. And I had to figure out how to control my legs in free fall, even though my EMS makes that more difficult for me to do. So it took a lot of extra work, took a lot of extra training on the ground. It took a lot of time going to those vertical wind tunnels that you were talking about earlier so that I could be right there and I could have an instructor holding my leg at exactly the right angle. And even though I couldn't feel below my knees, I could learn how to feel the tension in the tendons behind my knee and understand what the rest of my leg was doing from that signal.
Hmm.
So I had to learn to use the signals that I was getting and to realize that a lot of the normal signals are just going to be noise in my case. So I had to retrain myself. I had to adapt to to focus on some different information. And once I was able to do that, then I was able to control my legs in free fall and I was able to pass that license. But who knows whether I was going to be able to do it. It was a real challenge.
Mm. I think David Goggins talks about very, very similar things, and but without the chronic. I suppose he had. Did he have learning difficulties and things like that? That there was something that was holding him back, and he had to keep going through training time and time again. And this is where his determination came from. And
Oh,
he was very
yeah.
similar, that he used to have to take things literally like you did, step by step, learning the way that he needed to learn them to
Hmm.
get through. I think that he went through basic training the most times of any graduate. I think it was something like 6 or 8 times or something. And
Yeah.
he kept on going back and going, okay, I'm going to learn a little bit more this time. And
Hmm.
and he had to learn a different way to get him through. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, another one of my challenges was learning how to stand up a landing when you can't feel your feet. So I can't feel when my feet are actually touching the ground. So I had to learn to feel the pressure at my knees.
mm,
And just took a lot of practice. And boy, I did a lot of PLFs. PLFs are parachute landing fall. I had some spectacular tumbles coming in. I mean, looked like I just bouncing around like a human rag doll. And sometimes getting past that goal is kind of painful, you
mhm,
know. And I, I certainly bounced a lot more than I was certain my 50-year-old carcass could handle whenever I was doing this. But it turns out that yes, if you go limp, you can withstand quite an impact.
mm. But that's part of the fun. That's part of the enjoyment, I think. And I remember just kind of looking back to this 24-hour challenge that we did, and it was one of the toughest endurance events that I've done. Um,
Hmm.
and I've run ultra marathons and things as well. So, but yeah, kind of looking back to that weekend, it was. I'll tell you a little story because it was fun, and it was hilarious. We found out there was 3 of us that were doing it. We
Hmm.
found out on Ben Nevis that for some reason my thighs didn't like walking uphill for extended periods. So my thighs were burning. They were burning for I think it's about 6 hour walk up and down. So for about an hour and a half,
Hmm.
2 hours, my thighs were burning and screaming at me.
Hmm.
So the other 2 guys kind of went on. I said, "Look, I'll catch you up. I'll be fine. I'll catch you up." So um, and then on the way down, my thighs were thanking me. They go, "Oh, it's fantastic." And one of the other guys went, "I've got a problem." And I'm like, "What?" Bearing in mind, this was the first mountain. And, and the one guy was like, I've got bad knees and they really hurt walking downhill. And we're like, oh, okay. Well, you catch it anyway. This went on, and the third guy we thought was invincible. He was very fit, and what you don't realize is Scafell Pike and Ben Nevis are kind of motorways. They're big, wide paths, and you even though you're walking
Hmm.
up a mountain, you don't feel you're on a mountain. And we got to um, Snowdon in Wales, and
Hmm.
that is up the side of a mountain, and you're on small
Yeah.
paths. And we're walking up, and we turned around, and the third lad we thought was invincible was just kind of sat on the ground, and we were going, "Are you okay?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm fine. There's something I haven't told you." And we said, what's the matter?" And he went, "I'm scared of heights." I
Mm.
didn't think we'd be walking up the side of mountains. And it just turned into the funniest thing ever. There was three of us who were all really fit, who were all kind of mentally prepared and physically prepared for it. We'd been training, and all three of us found things that we didn't know about ourselves in those 24
Hmm.
hours. And it was just the support of each of us to say, well, okay, we can take it at your pace, or we can go on, and what do you want us to do to help? And
One
that's
of the things,
that's what it
yeah,
was. And it's incredible when you get asked that question, not, come on, it's only a mountain, you can do this, I thought you were fit. And no, there was no blame culture there. It was, what can we do to help? What will help you the most?
sure.
And I think that is a very powerful question.
It, truly, it is, and John Donne was right. No man's an island, and we are social creatures, and no matter how you may want to conceive of yourself as completely self-contained, that's a lie.
Hmm.
And we all need help at some times, and sometimes we're really bad at asking for help. And that was one of the ways that I got myself into trouble in my own life, because remember when I was getting finally correctly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I was going through some pretty awful exacerbations during that period. During the same time, my then wife was dealing with mystery symptoms that turned out to be a very late stage 3 uh, kidney cancer, and we were a one income family. I mean, I had my job as a professor, and we had two small kids, and I'm trying to do that, and I'm taking on more and more and more extra work. I mean, I was teaching at least 11 classes a year, plus administering an academic program where I had 150 instructors and 10,000 students, you know, answering to me. And so I was I was in desperate need of help because I was swamped with my own body coming apart and trying to keep it all together for the family. And I did a really awful job of asking for help. And by the time we got her through that surgery that did indeed save her life, uh, I was completely wrecked. And the consequence of that for me was the worst exacerbation to my MS I've ever had. It was a massive right frontal temporal lesion. And for those who don't know, that's a list of symptoms that reads a lot like dementia. I had massive problems with higher cognition, with social processing, with emotional regulation, things like that. And my life completely came apart. And part of it was Not even that I wasn't asking for help, but it was I didn't know how to ask for help in an effective way.
Hmm.
And I waited too long to ask for help. I thought, well, it's only a little bad, and we'll get through this in another week or so. And you know how we get to this place where our lives where things are kind of bad, and we think, okay, I now we're being controlled by our primal brain, and
Hmm.
everything is this acute stress response, this fight or flight, and it's really a lot more than fight or flight. It's like freeze, front, flight, fight, fawn, flock, fright, faint. I mean, there's a lot of F's going on there.
Hmm.
But everything, our world constricts down to the here and the now and the concrete. And we know that there are other things that we have to be taking care of. We're not taking care of ourselves at this point. And we think, okay, we'll get this immediate problem done, and in a week or two we'll be past that, and then I'll be able to catch up on this other stuff that I know I'm letting slide.
Hmm.
Well, that's fine if it's truly an acute challenge, but if it's not, like my MS, then you keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until you are so wrecked that you don't know where you're going to find a way to get back to yourself. You no longer recognize you. The people around you no longer recognize you. And I was in that place. And
Hmm.
and it begins by presuming, we should always presume in our modern world that those acute challenges are going to actually be chronic,
Yeah.
and that it's going to take longer than we, with our little primal cave child brain, think it's going to take,
Hmm.
because you can't let all of those, kind of goes under that rubric now of self-care things, go for that long. Because if you do, by the time you look up again, you're going to be completely wrecked.
Mm. I always like the analogy of the bottle of water that, "Oh, Kevin, here's a bottle of water. I want you to hold it out straight for two
Right.
hours." And you go, "Okay, I've picked it up. It's not particularly heavy. 2 hours
Yeah.
is fine." And you kind of get into it. And the question is, when do you ask for help?
Mm.
Because you won't be able to hold anything out for 2 hours.
No.
When do you ask for help? And most people would struggle until the point that they can no longer hold that bottle of water out anymore. And then it's
Yeah.
actually, can you help me with this? And I think
Yeah.
the earlier we identify the challenge, and like you say, that it starts off at acute and then becomes chronic.
Hmm.
If we can identify as early as possible that actually this is going to be a challenge for me,
Yeah.
I may need
And
help.
yeah, and the people around you, we need to stop diminishing or belittling people who are asking for help.
Mhm.
Because if your response is, oh, that's really easy, that's not a big deal. Well, one, you don't know the context that it's happening within.
Mhm.
And that thing that may seem really small to you may be the last straw on a massive pile of things that you don't see. So we have to get better at acknowledging that the little help is a really crucial thing. And it's a really crucial thing that people feel comfortable asking for that little help now, because we're working together to stem the tide on something really critical and nasty and awful that will be coming if we keep cascading down the pike. It's like I'll give you another skydiving example here. It's we just passed actually the safest year in the history of skydiving. In the United States, there were 3.5 million jumps in 2021 and only 10 fatalities,
Wow.
which is pretty good odds. Pretty good
Hmm.
odds. But here's the thing, and people always think, well, maybe it's like equipment failure or things like that causes, and no, that's not, because people always ask, well, what if your parachute fails? Well, that's not the reason people die. The reason people die skydiving is what we euphemistically call pilot error. Okay. And what this generally means is it's either hubris or stupidity. And it's usually somebody with a bit of experience who is hot dogging it too close to the ground. That's usually what happens. And so and there's some others, but I mean that's the most common reason now.
Mm.
And once you but if you look at any one of the incident reports behind those fatalities, you will see that there was a string of bad decisions that happened, and that string could have been broken at any time in like the last 3 minutes of the skydive. But they made a bad decision when they were a mile up, and they made another bad decision at 1,000 feet. They made another bad decision 300 feet, and at any one of those places, it would have been easier to change, and it wouldn't have the catastrophic ending to it. And that is so often where we are in our lives. We don't recognize it because it's not as dramatic and immediate
Hmm.
as being, in the air with a skydive, but it is nevertheless the same, where we've got one wrong decision, and it may not even be a bad decision. It may be a poorly informed decision, or it may be a decision that you have not practiced enough. You just may be out of your depth, right? But nevertheless, asking for help for the small thing when you're a mile up is a lot easier than trying to correct this mistake that has gotten magnified through that long process. And we live that all the time. And
Hmm.
almost all the time when we come to a crisis point in our lives, it's because we have ignored or downplayed those earlier warning symptoms a week ago or a month ago or a year ago or a decade ago.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really like that kind of the analogy. And yeah, you're right that it's not until people hit the ground that that they go, that hurt. Maybe I should have asked for help earlier. And
Yeah.
and hopefully, we don't have too many people actually hit the ground. It is talking about how to, um and this is what I want to get onto is how do people ask for help? I certainly know, the kind of the process, and I think that you touched on some of the things earlier. Um, so I guess it's kind of an open-ended question of, of how do we ask for help? Because I think sometimes asking for help can have, some stigmatism to it that you
Hmm.
kind of mentioned. Um, that I think that sometimes when people ask for help as well, and then personal boundaries are crossed,
Hmm.
so that we then or people then reject that help, they're seen as, um, ungrateful. You ask for help, here's
Yeah.
the help, you're now turning it away.
Well,
You're
and
ungrateful.
here's a really interesting negotiation that we get into implicitly here, and that is we have to become more open about this idea of what kind of help am I willing to ask for, and what kind of help are they willing to give? Because sometimes the kind of help that I'm willing to ask for, that I'm willing to accept, is not the kind of help that somebody around me is either capable of or willing to give. They may be able to do something else that will help you, but you may have to realize that if you are in the position of asking for help, you may not be in the position of dictating what that help looks like.
Hmm.
And so we've got to understand that, on both ends there are misunderstandings that happen. And if somebody asks you for help, and you recognize the problem that they're in is similar to maybe a problem that you've been in before, and the thing that helped you get through that help, and you try to offer that, but this is a different person in a slightly different circumstance, and that may not be the thing that's going to help them. So we have expectations and preconceptions on both sides, and this can lead to really hurt feelings on both sides, because here's somebody saying, okay, I trust you enough to be vulnerable and ask for help, and I really need your help, and I'm not getting it. And then the person on the other side saying, hey, I really love you and I'm trying to help you in the way that I know how, and you're not accepting it.
Hmm.
And whoa, wait a minute. If you are in that circumstance, then you both need to pause, and you need to begin with, do we both have good intentions? And are we both trying to improve this circumstance? Now, let's have the conversation about how we are misunderstanding one another, so that we can get to something that, if I need help, I will accept and can use, and that you are willing to come through with, and will feel good about doing. And that's not a conversation that most of the time we actually have when help is being sought.
But it's a conversation that is easier to have early on,
Yeah, very much so.
not
Very
when you're
much so.
desperate for help, because emotions are then involved,
Hmm.
and we all know what emotions can do, and certainly when you're feeling very, um using one of your analogies, when kind of when you're 100 foot from the ground, the emotions going through your mind, and
Yeah.
they're not always rational.
No, no, and in fact, we know that once our sympathetic nervous system is triggered, once we have that acute stress response, our primal brain is driving. It's
Hmm.
called an amygdala hijacking, and which is a lovely term. I love it. But what it means is our inner cave child is running the show, and by definition, that short circuits our frontal brains. It short circuits the slower, more nuanced, more gradiated, advanced thinking, because you are now in this perspective that, whether it's correct or not, sees every problem as an acute, emergent, life or death challenge right here, right now. And that's not necessarily the best framework through which to see most of the challenges that we have created in this world that we now inhabit.
I think, yeah, you raise a great point. It's irrespective of whether it's right or wrong.
Hmm.
It is a response. It is an emotional response to a situation, and like you say, it's kind of the primeval then comes out of fight or flight, and
Hmm.
as much as humans we evolve, as much as we move away from that caveman kind of scenario, it's still hardwired in us.
See, this is, I mean, you're absolutely right, and this is one of the common misconceptions that we have. So I call it the primal systems in our brain. And these are early in two ways. One, they're early evolutionarily. Okay, so they're systems that we share with many other animals, especially
Mhm.
mammals. They're also early in another way. They're youthful. So each in our individual developments, a lot of the anchor points that we create are from when we are kids. And it's called a primacy effect. And it it has a disproportionate influence on how each of us sees the world because it's the first place that we are anchoring in there. Now, why is this important? It's important because as we have developed as a species and as each of us matures into adulthood and eventually senescence, right? Those systems don't mature. The way we develop as humans is like the rings on a tree. So those older systems are still in there. They don't appreciably improve, and they're still there. But more experience and more development has added another layer, and then another layer, and then another layer, and another layer. But they're still in there, and
Mhm.
they're still trying to have their influence. They're still trying to be helpful in the ways that they can understand. But they can't understand the more sophisticated ways to be helpful. And so if we get angry at those voices, if we try to clamp them down, well, you know how effective it is when you've got a little kid who really, really wants to talk to you. You're not going to dissuade them.
Mhm.
When you've got your dog or your cat or your pet who's really wanting attention right now, the more you get angry at them and try to shush them, the more they react and the more vociferous they get. So we have to learn to accept that we are, each of us in our heads, a society of mind. We've got lots and lots and lots of these facets and systems that are all trying to get their 2 cents in, or their 2 pence in, as you're trying to make your decisions. And we have to learn to acknowledge them and be kinder to them. But that doesn't mean that they have to be driving. And that means that we have to become more patient with ourselves. We have to become kinder to ourselves. We have to become more humble in ourselves.
Mhm. This kind of leads me on to a question I've never really kind of thought about too much, and a couple of things have really kind of come together. So, talking kind of about primeval kind of evolution and the fact that it is still in there.
Mhm.
Does this then lead to unconscious bias of who we would accept help from?
Yeah, yeah, actually it does. And there is good research on this, and it turns out that okay, so if we let's frame it this way. Our primal cave children are tribal, and they are inherently conservative, not in a political sense, in they because they want to protect the resources that they have available to them. And they're tribal in the sense that our group that we acknowledge as us, because all humans divide the world into us versus them. We just differ on where we put that boundary and on how far out we put that boundary. So in modern Western civilizations, when we are well resourced and we feel comfortable, we can put that boundary out really far and we can become much more, what we would now say multicultural.
Hmm.
However, our primal cave children are not multicultural, and they have a very small sense of who my people are. And so that's why you see in traditional human society what you had were small kinship groups, and that's how we negotiated the world. We had tribes, literally. And they were a handful of families that were intermarried with one another, and everybody knew everybody, and you wouldn't get more than maybe about 150 people or so. And we know that there are hard limits in our brain. Each of us can at any one time have mental schema, which are our framework for understanding a person, for about 150 people in our
Hmm.
head. We can recognize them by sight and by name and by personal details, and that's about all that we can have that kind of deeper understanding with. And we can only get really deep with a handful of people. And so you have to feel comfortable and satisfied and well resourced to expand that further out. So yeah, we are tribal
Mm.
when we are distressed, and we are able to think beyond the tribal when we are not distressed.
Yeah, which again, it kind of that leads us back to the earlier we start asking for help, the less bias that we bring with us, and the less and the wider, you talk about the boundaries, the fences, the
Hmm.
wider the net that we can cast to
Yeah.
look for that help, the earlier it is. It's I just find it absolutely fascinating when we talk, and then we were talking a little bit before about the show about kind of Earth timelines and when things kind of happened, and where we are now from kind of those first this first nomads that decide, no, actually we're going to stop here and plant some seeds, to where we are now isn't that long.
No,
And I
not at
think
all.
this is I think this is where I'm absolutely fascinated with what kind of Elon Musk is trying to do, and all this advancement, and it's not all in the sense of, wow, I can't believe he's doing this or we're doing this. It's the awe of, wow, it wasn't that long ago until the first kind of group of settlers, if you like, decided, no, we're not going to keep walking after the buffalo. We're not going to keep walking after the woolly mammoth, or
Hmm.
whatever it was. We're actually going to stop here, and we're going to farm, not
We
knowing what
are,
farming was at the time.
yeah, we are all uppity monkeys. I, we are pretentious, and we like to think that we are so much more advanced than we actually are.
Hmm.
And 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 we forget that technological innovation has no relevance to moral innovation.
Hmm.
And we are still the same moral creatures that we were thousands of years ago, and we are still grappling with the same moral and ethical and identity questions that were present in the earliest human writings. You go back 2,500 years to classic Greek philosophy, and they're they're wrestling with the same questions that we're wrestling with now. I
Hmm.
mean, I was animated. The thing that that got me going with the book and the seminars and Your Life Lived Well and everything else was as a freshman in college, I did a seminar on eudaimonia, which was the Greek word for a good life. And that first semester, it was a weed out semester in an honors program that I was in, and we had to read lots of classics and wrestle with them. And like 40% of us were gone by the end of the first semester. And but the thing that struck me is a lot of philosophy was what we would now call self-help.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it was. It was Plato and Aristotle looking at eudaimonia, what constitutes a good life. And so in my work, I'm interested in a slightly different version of that question. How do we live a good life when we're stuck with something bad we
Mm-hmm.
can't get away from? And this is this wonderful, great conversation that humans have been having for as long as we've been conversing with one another. And I think it is so amazing that I get to live in a time and a place where I get to add my little ideas to
Mm-hmm.
this massive conversation and interact with so many wonderful people like you who are interested in these same questions and how we help one another uh, do this in our own lives. And what a wonderful time to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that what we say and what we do is something that other people are going to react to in the future and say, "Oh yeah, that Payne guy, he was totally wrong, but that gave me an idea, and
Yeah.
here's something better."
Yeah, it is. I do find when you're talking about kind of the old philosophers and people say, "Oh, they were geniuses. They were so far ahead of their time," and actually, the fact that they're still relevant means that we're still talking about the same things. Like you
Right.
said, it's not necessarily they were geniuses, though.
No.
Though the fact that they had the platform, they had um the ability to write and read and things that we take for granted now that not everybody had back then, that
Hmm.
and it is, you're right, it's what we're talking about today is age old discussions, and who knows, someone might dig this show up in 100 years or 200 years and go, wow, this is what they were discussing in
Yeah.
2022.
Because fundamentally, we're all still human,
Hmm.
and we still have those same concerns. And it goes back to, I fundamentally think that being human is about collecting experiences. And if we want to live a good life, it's about collecting experiences that are going to lead to those, six values that I talked about around at the
Hmm.
beginning. And and we know how to do those things. But the problem is, in the press of day-to-day concerns, we lose track of that. And we we forget that all of the changes, if so by definition, if you are unsatisfied with some part of your life, then the root of your solution is somehow in behavioral change. You're going to have to do something different. And here's the crux of the issue. And this is a lot of what my company does. And it's, if I want to change a behavior, there are 150 different ways to change a behavior. All of them work for someone, but only some of them will work for you. And the ones that work for you now won't work for you in 6 months or 6 years, because you're going to change, your environment's going to change, your goals are going to change. And that's really frustrating, because We don't want it to be that way. We want to say we think it's going to be easy where we say, "Oh, okay, I just, maybe you think, "Oh, I'm getting a little paunchy and I need to lose 20 pounds." Okay? Or, a stone and a half. But I I I that's the easy thing. That's a goal. The how is hard, and the
Hmm.
how is going to be different for everybody. And when you're trying to change a behavior, the behavior is like the tip of the iceberg. And below that iceberg, there's all of this cognition and the networks and the emotion and the identity work and the habituation and the ritualization, all this other stuff that's going on that's working against that behavior being changed. So we say, oh, it should be a little thing. I want to change, I don't want to have, I want to cut out one snack in the middle of the morning.
Hmm.
Well, the behavior is a tiny little thing, but it's the tip of the iceberg.
Hmm.
And we get upset at ourselves because we think that we are inadequate. And think it's my mind, it's my behavior, I should do it. But you have to realize the part of you that is you, your identity, is a tiny little part of everything that's going on in your mind. And that's where I come back to, you've got to be kinder, you've got to be more humble, you've got to show yourself a little grace and realize that it's going to be a lot more difficult than you think.
I think something that's very discounted as well is age. That as we get older, things don't heal as quickly. We don't change as quickly. We don't. You know, I don't want to admit this live on air, but kind of the six pack I had when I was kind of 18, 19, I don't have anymore, and I don't want to
Mhm,
shatter illusions. But I know, kind of mid-40s that I haven't got the same body. My body has different requirements
mhm.
and it responds differently to how it did when I was 18, 19. Um, and I think that sometimes we don't look at age as being a factor as well. We're always told that it's not too late to start. It's not too late to follow your dreams. It's not too late to do whatever you want in life. And that is true. It is 100% true. It's never too late, but be prepared that you might not get the outcome you thought you
Yeah.
would. Be prepared that it's going to be harder work.
Yeah, and that is certainly the case. And one of it is part of it is our systems do slow down. We still have neuroplasticity, we still have neurogenesis, we can still learn, our bodies can still adapt on every level, but we get more tired more easily, and we may take longer to recover in between. And that's one of the things with growth. So you have to, if there are two kinds of growth, there's two kinds of learning. There's what I call growth learning, which happens at the edge, and that's
Mhm.
physical edge, emotional edge, cognitive edge, social edge, whatever it is. And then there's habituation, and that happens down in your comfort zone. And the thing is, edge learning. So let's use a physical example. So I go lift weights, and I push my muscle groups to failure. Now, that was the trigger for growth, but that doesn't cause the growth. The only way I'm going to grow out of that, because I've sent my body the signal that yes, I'm going to be demanding more of you now. So you need to respond by learning and growing. But now I've got to take myself from the edge back to my home, and where I can rest and relax and recover and recuperate and sleep and consolidate and repair, and all of those things that have to be done. And that's where the growth occurs. So if we do not look after those needs, if we do not sleep, if we do not have adequate nutrition, if we do not allow ourselves to feel comfortable and satisfied and relaxed and safe, we're never going to take advantage of the spur to growth.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's again, in my head, it's that preparation to then activate that trigger.
Yeah.
And when we bring it to personal careers and things as well, that yes, there's so much encouragement. You can start a side hustle tomorrow. Go and do this, go and do that. But if you haven't done the prep, if you haven't done the work, it's no point going out and starting that business tomorrow, starting that side hustle, because the work hasn't been done. The side hustle, the start of it is, as you say, is the trigger to something. But
Right.
unless you've got all the other factors behind it and planned out and to a certain degree, there's no point activating that trigger.
Well, as I tell people, because I meet a lot of people who are entrepreneurs or wantrepreneurs, and I explain to them, until you have regular paying clients, you don't have a business. You've got an expensive hobby with business cards,
Hmm.
and you've got to actually do the thing, and the doing of the thing in the right way will attract the people that you need, who will see the value in what you're doing, and they will be willing to trade some of their money for the value that you are offering. And it's really simple. All human relationships are exchanges.
Hmm.
Now, they're not explicit exchanges. It's really interesting. So there's uh, going all the way back to the early part of the 20th century, there was an anthropologist um, uh, named Marcel Mauss, and he was Emile Durkheim, the sociologist's nephew. And he came up. He wrote this lovely little book called The Gift,
Hmm.
and he conceived of human relationships as existing in two types. And really, it's not two types; it's the ends of a continuum. They're exchange relationships and gift relationships. So, like, maybe the most obvious example of a gift type relationship is, say, parent child. And you don't expect, when your kids are little, especially, you don't expect anything from them. I mean, they're leaky globs, and they are just, a lot of trouble. And fortunately, they're occasionally cute with it, and that allows them to survive. So you give to them because fundamentally it's about who they are, not what they can do for you. And you hope that someday they pass it on. And so, but all relationships do, whether they are gift type or exchange type. So, like, exchange type, that's the clerk at the off license down the street, right? And you go in, as long as you can give them money and they can give you the thing that you want, then that's the extent of the relationship. That's all it needs to be. Okay. But as we know people more, they start moving from exchange more into the gift type, because the relationship is less about what they do for you and more about who they are to you. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not still some kind of exchange going on, because what social psychologists frame as rewards others provide is really important for relationships to
Hmm.
continue. But we understand that there can be a lot more give and take in that balance, and we're not like keeping an exact tally on what's going on, right? We're we know that over time, right now, I've got to do more for them, and later on, we expect, oh, they'll do more for me,
Hmm.
and somehow it'll roughly even out, but you're not going to be, taking a ledger about the whole thing, and so this is, this is something that we want to keep in mind when how are we, this I guess goes right back to the helping one another that was kind of a recurring topic in our
Hmm.
conversation here.
Yeah, I think the exchange relationship is not thought about so much. It's something that I certainly coach on, and it's certainly something that I've lived through is setting those personal boundaries, and
Hmm.
and the type of relationship you're talking about is or relationships that you're talking about certainly for me falls into those personal boundaries, especially with that
Hmm.
exchange relationship.
Yep.
Now we can talk, about the exchange that we're having here. We're having an exchange of conversation. We're having an exchange of dialect, but even deeper than that, without guests, that this show would be me talking for an hour and a half every single week, and how much value people would get from that is debatable. Um, so there's that exchange there where you're helping me, or you could argue and say you're gifting me your time and your knowledge and your expertise, and I am gifting you a platform to share those on. So whether
Hmm.
it's a gift or whether it's an exchange, but with certainly with personal boundaries, that that if it's a one-way gift relationship or a one-way, or you think is an exchange relationship, but actually you're the only one that's giving.
Hmm.
And when I say talk about personal boundaries, I'm not talking about cutting people off, you know, uh, straight away, but it is a case of, oh, okay, I'm going to step back from this relationship, this friendship, this exchange relationship, and let's see what happens. And I've done that on numerous times, that I've stepped back
Hmm.
and the other person hasn't reacted. They haven't noticed.
Yeah.
So it's for me, it's okay. So this is where we are. This is the extent of our relationship now. I'm not going to
Well, I
keep
think,
gifting you with nothing coming back, and that's not coming from a place of expectation. Because as you said, that there's no tally chart. We haven't got a nice
yeah,
detailed coloured in spreadsheet of all the times that we paid a compliment to someone and then not received it back. And
right.
but but it is personal boundaries within friendships, within relationships.
But there comes a point with any long-term relationship. We can look at long-term relationships as investments. And if you are constantly investing in the other person and they are not in you, then eventually that's abusive.
Hmm.
That's somebody, that's just somebody taking advantage of you.
Hmm.
And and so what and I find this with people when you've got long-term partners and one of them is diagnosed with a chronic health condition. One of the things that they don't understand at the beginning is that this is going to fundamentally change your relationship and the balance of your relationship. And you and your partner need to sit down and have a frank conversation about renegotiating what this relationship is going to be. Because there may be some things that you used to do in the relationship that you can no longer do. And there may be some things with regard to caregiving that they are not willing to do,
Hmm.
and so forth. So and yet, when you are in any kind of relationship with two people who genuinely care about one another, we both want to feel like we are giving and contributing to that relationship. So if you are constantly on the receiving end of caregiving, then you naturally want to find some different ways that you can feel like you are contributing
Hmm.
as well
Hmm.
to that relationship. And that requires this, discussion of how, how are we going to renegotiate what each of us are getting out of this relationship so that we can both feel nourished and that we can both feel, we are getting what we want and giving valued things. And and truly this is something that often I see with any long-term relationship. We change, we grow, and sometimes we grow in the same direction, sometimes we grow in different directions. And it is useful for us if we spend some time every once in a while just explicitly having this conversation
Hmm.
and saying, what do you want, what are you willing to give, and just understanding it in those terms.
Mm. Yeah, that is. Yeah, I'm trying to think who there was somebody I was listening to, and they were talking about having a monthly family meeting and
Hmm.
discussing exactly this.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
in a blame way, not in a
Mm-mm.
um, accusation way. It was right. Let's every month sit down, talk about what's working, what isn't working, how we can both be nourished and fulfilled, and what are we willing to give, what are we
Yep.
willing to accept. And it's just I'm trying to remember off the top of my brain now who it was, and I was like, wow, that
it's
that is.
it is a long standing technique in the psychology of relationships,
Mhm.
because what you're doing essentially is you are divorcing the discussion from the heat of the moment when one or the other of you felt offense.
Mhm.
And so rather than having the fight, we want to give yourself some time and some distance, and set up a mutually acknowledged environment so that both people understand this is this is about practicality. This is about operational decisions. This is not about hurt. This is about how we support one another to improve the function of our lives individually and together.
Mhm. Yeah, they actually went. I wish I could remember who it was. It was just fleeting. They actually went one stage further and said that at the end of every monthly meeting, as they called it,
Mhm.
they then had the option to walk away from the relationship with no hard
Yeah,
feelings.
yeah, and
If
certainly
either of
some
them
people do
didn't
that.
want to be in it anymore, that they could walk away and there'd be no animosity. And I was like, wow, that is
Yeah,
that
and
is
it's
pretty
it's
powerful.
it's well, there are a couple of things there. One is like, maybe monthly, maybe quarterly,
Hmm.
maybe annually, depends on the relationship. But here's the fundamental truth to that, and the fundamental truth is every long-term relationship of any kind, okay, long-term friends, romantic partners, whatever it is, only continues to exist because both people involved tacitly continued to choose that relationship.
Hmm.
And if one person chooses not, then the relationship is gone.
Hmm.
It takes two people to continue a relationship, it only takes one to end it.
Hmm.
Even if the other person doesn't realize it at the time, and even if you are still going through the motions, functionally, emotionally, there is no longer that connection
Hmm.
between the two of you. So if you can look at, every day when you get up, and you are about to interact with that person, stop and reflect. Are
Mhm,
you choosing that relationship today? Or
mhm.
are you going through the motions? And that goes back to me on the cover of the book actively choosing life every time. What are you going to do? Are you going to actively choose life or not?
It's a great question. It's a great place to end, I think, as well. We could be going on. We've just
Oh, we could be going till
going
tomorrow.
on for an hour, like just over an hour, 1 hour 35 at the moment, just over. So yeah, this could be unpacked quite a lot, quite a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of life lessons in there, and I'm hoping that people who have watched even 5 minutes of it, we've been getting people flicking on and off from Facebook as well. So yeah, wow. I think this is a discussion that we need to carry on
Very
um,
much so.
later
I've
in
been
the year.
delighted getting to know you, Greg.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think a lot of the things that that I have in my mind, that you have the kind of the knowledge and the education to kind of answer, that we can unpack a lot more, and we can have a really good kind of in-depth discussion about things, because it's living with chronic pain or a chronic illness it does bring things home to you, and it is a wake-up call. It is a realization of life. um
Yeah.
are there any kind of words of wisdom that you want to share, kind of now at the end of the show, that you haven't already touched on? Maybe
Oh,
a
I may be all
phrase or a
wise.
favorite quote or
Yeah, I may be all wised out, but one thing I will reiterate, and that is, this seems so small, and it seems so insignificant, and it seems so irrelevant, but I am serious when I say it all begins with kindness. And that means kindness to yourself
Mhm,
first, because most of us are really awful to ourselves. Most of us, if somebody else treated you the way you treat yourself, you wouldn't be in a relationship with that person.
mhm, mhm.
And yet you're stuck in that carcass with that mouthy jackweasel, and you can't get away from him. You can't. So imagine how much distress and anger and frustration and sadness and hopelessness that adds to your life. So be kinder to yourself.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been great getting to know you, and thank you for your knowledge and expertise, and hopefully we've touched on the surface of quite a few things that people are going to go away and think about. And as always, if you want to speak to me or to Kevin, then come find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and obviously YouTube. If you can't find Kevin, but you can find me, then drop me a message, and I'll pass your details on to Kevin. No problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And just
thank
go to
you.
yourlifelivedwell.co.
There we go. We'll drop that in some comments somewhere on the recorded sessions, which would be brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Greg.
And
Be well.
yeah, take care, and we'll speak to you all very soon.